Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm Corey.
And I'm Sharon. And today, apparently, we're going to argue.
We're not going to argue. We're going to have a very civilized conversation.
You say that, and yet you're already smiling like someone who's about to start an argument.
Okay, fine. Today we're talking about generations, Gen Z versus Millennials. What's different? What's the same? Who has it worse?
Millennials. Obviously.
See, you already started.
I'm just stating a fact early so we can move on.
Okay, so I'm Gen Z, Sharon is a Millennial, and we are going to dig into this properly. This is going to be fun.
I have a feeling I'm going to feel very old by the end of this episode.
Only slightly. Let's go. Okay, so before we jump in, Sharon, do you actually identify with the word millennial? Like, does it feel like you?
Honestly, not particularly. I think the word has been used as a kind of shorthand that flattens an enormous range of people. There are millennials who grew up with dial-up internet and millennials who had smartphones in secondary school.
We're not a monolith. Same with Gen Z, though, right? Like, people act like all Gen Z are the same. TikTok, anxiety, avocado toast.
I think avocado toast is more of a millennial thing, actually.
Is it?
We were blamed for killing it and then for being obsessed with it at the same time. It was a confusing period.
Okay, so we both agree that the labels are kind of reductive. But there are real differences, right? Like things that actually shaped us differently because of when we grew up.
Yes, I think that's true. The technology context alone is significant. I remember a world without smartphones. You genuinely do not.
I mean, I was like 2 when smartphones came out, so no, I don't.
And I think that creates a fundamentally different relationship with technology. Not better or worse, just different.
Okay, let's actually get into it then. Grew up with it versus grew up into it.
Let's start with technology, since I already brought it up, because I think this is probably the most significant dividing line between our generations.
Okay, what's your take?
My take is that there's a meaningful difference between people who remember life before the internet was everywhere and people who don't.
And I don't say that to be superior. I say it because I think it shapes your baseline assumptions about life in ways you might not even be aware of. Like what?
Like, I remember being bored, properly bored, with nothing to do and no device to pick up. And I think that boredom did something. It made me figure out how to entertain myself, how to sit with discomfort, how to be alone with my thoughts without immediately reaching for stimulation.
Okay, but that's not really a Gen Z thing. That's more like smartphone addiction is a human thing now. Millennials are just as on their phones.
Fair point. But you were handed a smartphone at a much more formative age. Their relationship formed earlier.
That's true. I got my first phone when I was 11, and honestly, looking back, 11 is really young for that.
Right. Whereas I was well into my teens before I had a proper internet-connected device. And even then, the internet was a destination, something you went to, not something that was always on.
I've never experienced that. Like, the internet has always just been there. Background. Like air.
Which is neither good nor bad necessarily. But it means you have a different relationship with being offline, with boredom, with waiting. Things that were normal to me would feel strange to you.
Okay, I will give you that. But here's my counterpoint. Because we grew up digital, we're also way better at filtering information. Like Gen Z can spot misinformation faster, can navigate online spaces more intuitively, can build communities and audiences in ways that took millennials years to figure out.
That's probably true. Digital literacy in certain respects is much higher.
And we're more aware of privacy, of data, of how algorithms work, because we grew up inside them. We understand the machine from the inside.
Though I'd argue that also comes with a certain cynicism, an awareness of being watched, of being marketed to that I'm not sure is entirely healthy for a teenager to carry.
Maybe, but ignorance isn't better. At least we know.
At least you know. Whether that knowledge makes things better or worse is a different question.
Okay, we're already going in circles and we haven't even gotten to the good stuff.
There's more?
So much more. Okay, work. This is a big one because I feel like millennials and Gen Z have really different attitudes toward work, and I think Gen Z gets unfairly criticized for it.
In what sense?
In the sense that Gen Z gets called lazy, entitled, unwilling to work hard because we push back on toxic work culture. But I think we're actually just the first generation to say out loud what everyone was thinking.
Or, and hear me out, you're the first generation to prioritize saying it over just getting on with things, which isn't necessarily the same as being more enlightened.
Oh, wow, we're starting.
I'm not being unkind. I genuinely think there's something to it. Millennials also hated overwork, also wanted balance, also suffered under bad bosses and exploitative structures. We just absorbed it. We didn't make it a public declaration.
And maybe that's the problem. Maybe absorbing it and not saying anything is exactly why nothing changed for so long.
That's a fair critique.
Like quiet quitting. Everyone acted like Gen Z invented slacking off. But what it actually meant was, I'm going to do exactly what I'm paid to do and not one thing more, which is not laziness. That's a contract.
I understand the framing. I think where I have some sympathy for the criticism is when quiet quitting becomes an identity rather than a correction.
There's a difference between refusing to be exploited and refusing to be engaged. Okay, where's the line for you?
I think the line is, do you care about the work itself? Not the company, not the boss, the actual work. Because I've seen both extremes. People who pour everything into a job that doesn't deserve it, and people who disengage so completely, they're just collecting a paycheck and calling it philosophy.
But here's the thing. Gen Z grew up watching millennials pour everything into work and get burned. We watched you get told if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life, and then watched you work yourselves into exhaustion chasing that dream. We saw the result. Of course, we're skeptical.
That's actually a fair observation. We were sold a narrative about work that turned out to be somewhat optimistic.
Somewhat. You were told passion plus hard work equals security. And then the housing market collapsed, student debt exploded, companies laid off loyal employees anyway.
All right. Yes. The deal we were offered was not exactly honored.
So Gen Z looked at that and said, we're going to be a bit more realistic from the start. We're not going to define ourselves by our jobs. We're going to have a life outside work. And I think that's actually healthy.
I think it can be.
No, I agree with that. I don't think Gen Z wants meaningless work. We just want the meaning to be mutual. Like, I'll bring my whole self to this if the company respects that I have a whole self.
That's actually a very reasonable position.
Thank you. I have them sometimes.
Who had it worse? Money. Can we talk about money? Because I have thoughts.
You always have thoughts. Go.
I think there's a tendency, and I understand why, for Gen Z to feel like their generation has it uniquely hard financially. Housing costs, inflation, student debt in certain countries, a job market that's increasingly unstable. And those things are real. I'm not dismissing them.
But
But millennials graduated into a global financial crisis, 2008. The jobs we'd been promised simply did not exist when we arrived. I had friends with good degrees who spent years in jobs entirely unrelated to what they trained for, earning very little, watching the housing market price them out while being told to stop buying coffee.
Oh, the coffee thing, the avocado toast thing.
Exactly. The logic was insulting. And I think that criticism of blaming individual spending habits for structural economic problems, that's something both generations have experienced. The framing just changes slightly.
For Gen Z, it's stop buying so much online, or your standards are too high. Like, no, I'm not being too picky. I just literally cannot afford what my parents could afford at my age, even with a comparable income.
That's statistically true in many markets. The ratio of home prices to income has shifted dramatically.
So it's not attitude, it's math.
It's largely math. And I think both generations are dealing with the same broken system, and occasionally making the mistake of blaming each other for it.
Which is exactly what someone who runs the system would want us to do.
That's quite politically astute of you.
I have my moments.
But I do think there's one genuine difference. Gen Z has a different relationship with money as a concept, less loyal to traditional markers of financial success, home ownership, a pension, a linear career, more comfortable with alternative paths.
Because we kind of have to be. But also, I think we genuinely believe in them differently.
Which might be wisdom, or it might be making a virtue of necessity.
Maybe both. Probably both.
That tends to be how it works.
Okay, this one I feel strongly about, mental health, because I think this is where Gen Z actually moved the needle in a meaningful way.
Go on.
Gen Z talks about mental health openly, in a way that previous generations really didn't. We use the vocabulary, anxiety, burnout, boundaries, therapy. We say these words out loud in public without the same stigma that used to be attached to them.
That's true. And I think it's largely a positive shift. When I was growing up, admitting you were struggling psychologically was still seen as a weakness in many contexts. You pushed through. You didn't talk about it.
And how well did that work?
Not particularly.
Exactly. So Gen Z saying, actually, I need help, and I'm going to say that out loud, I think that's progress.
I agree. I do want to offer one gentle complication, though.
Here it comes.
Just one. I think there's a difference between naming what you're feeling, which is valuable, and building an identity around struggle. And occasionally I see the latter, where the language of mental health becomes a way of limiting yourself rather than understanding yourself. I can't do this because of my anxiety, used as a permanent stop rather than a starting point.
Okay, I hear that. And I think it's a valid thing to watch for. But I also think the reason you're seeing that is because we're in the early days of this shift. Like, when you first give people permission to name something, sometimes they over-rotate. That's not a reason to take away the permission.
No, absolutely not.
And Gen Z has also grown up with social media, showing us very carefully curated versions of other people's lives, which is genuinely not great for mental health. So the anxiety isn't invented. The pressure is real.
I don't doubt that. The comparison is constant and relentless in a way that simply wasn't the case before social media was ubiquitous.
Like, I know intellectually that what I see on Instagram isn't real, but knowing something and feeling it are different things. And seeing perfect highlight reels every day from age 13, that shapes you.
I came to social media as an adult. I already had a formed sense of self when it arrived. You were still building yours.
That's a huge difference. And I think it explains a lot of the mental health statistics we see in our generation. It's not weakness. It's a different kind of pressure.
I think that's right. And I think millennials have some responsibility in acknowledging that, because we built and popularized the platforms that Gen Z inherited.
That's unexpectedly self-aware of you.
I contain multitudes, Corey.
Okay.
All right. What do you think each generation actually has to learn from the other? Like, genuinely?
All right. What Gen Z can learn from millennials, and I say this without condescension, is a certain durability. Millennials have had to be adaptable in quite unglamorous ways. Not everything has a narrative arc. Not every struggle becomes a lesson. Sometimes you just keep going, without the story, without the audience.
That's actually really useful. I think there's something in Gen Z culture around everything being shareable, every experience being content, and there's something lost when you can't just have a hard moment privately.
Right. Not everything needs an audience.
Yeah. What millennials could learn from Gen Z, though.
I'm ready.
Okay, don't get defensive. I think millennials could learn from Gen Z's willingness to say, this isn't working, and I'm going to say so. That directness, the ability to set a boundary without performing gratitude while you do it.
Can you give me an example?
Like, Gen Z will leave a bad job without agonizing about it for 2 years, without feeling like they failed some loyalty test. They'll just go. Because staying somewhere that's making you miserable doesn't make you a good employee.
It just makes you miserable. I've definitely stayed in situations longer than I should have because leaving felt like quitting.
Yes, that's the thing. Millennials were taught that persistence was always a virtue. And sometimes it is, but sometimes you should just leave.
That's actually a valuable point. There's a difference between resilience and stubbornness dressed up as virtue.
Exactly. And I think Gen Z is better at seeing that difference.
partly because we had less invested in the idea that the system would reward us if we just kept going.
Possibly the most useful cynicism I've ever heard described.
We're full of useful cynicism.
I'm beginning to see the appeal.
Okay, one more. I think Gen Z can also learn from millennials in terms of long-term thinking, because I do think, and I say this about my own generation, we can be very present-focused, very right now, which is good in some ways, but financial planning, building things over time, being patient, those aren't weaknesses. They're skills worth developing.
And millennials could stand to borrow a little more of Gen Z's present focus, I think. We spent a lot of time waiting for the future to arrive, the career, the stability, the life we'd been promised, and sometimes forgot to actually live in the meantime.
Yeah, both things.
Past and future can steal the present if you're not careful.
That's well put.
I'm not just good looking, Sharon.
Nobody said you were.
Wow, harsh.
So, where did we land? Did we settle anything?
I think we settled that generations are real, but also kind of made up.
That seems about right. Real in the sense that shared historical conditions create shared tendencies. Made up in the sense that any individual will always be more complex than the label.
And I think the generation gap is real, but it's also been weaponized. Like every time we're arguing about Gen Z versus millennials, we're not talking about the structural things that actually affect both of us.
Housing, wages, healthcare, climate.
Right, the actual problems. And dividing us by age group is convenient for some people.
Very diplomatically said.
I try. What's your one takeaway?
That the generation you grew up in shapes you, but it doesn't define you. And the most interesting people I know, regardless of age, are the ones who can look at their own generational assumptions critically, who can say, I believe this because of when I grew up. Is it actually true?
Mine is talk to people who are at a different life stage than you. Like actually talk to them. Not to win an argument, not to prove a point, just to understand what the world looks like from a different vantage point.
Because I think I came into this conversation thinking I knew what a millennial was. And now I think Sharon is just a person. A slightly old person.
Slightly.
Who grew up differently than me and has things to say that are worth hearing.
How deeply touching.
You're welcome. All right, everyone. If you enjoyed today's debate/conversation, let us know in the comments. Are you Gen Z or millennial? And what's one thing your generation gets wrong about themselves?
We genuinely like to hear. And if you found this useful for your English listening practice, a like and a subscribe helps us keep making these conversations.
We'll see you in the next one. Take care.
Cheerio.
He says cheerio unironically. Every time. Bye, everyone.
It is entirely unironic.